All right, I think we're live. So obviously, this talk is about zero trust, and of course, my tie-in was the Ostem. My name is Chris Griffin. I've been a researcher, penetration tester, and a volunteer with ISOCOM, mostly working on the Ostem since 2004. Roughly 2016, I think it was. They made me a board member. Like I said, primarily I've been spending my time with the Ostem. However, in 2016, I got pulled into helping with Hacker High School. We did several years by invite at RSA conference in San Francisco and their cyber village, which covered security awareness essentially for anywhere from children with colorful books, kind of teaching them you know ideas around security, then all the way up through Hacker High School, which covers teenagers and college age people. So I've been a penetration tester for about 15 years. Prior to that, I worked in a SOC, and prior to that, I worked in audit compliance. So zero trust has been around actually for quite some time, even prior to it being coined in 1994 by Stephen Paul Marsh. I'm sorry. Uh, Military uses the equivalent of zero trust with their top secret security compartmentalized. I've put a link for Wikipedia that you can read up a little bit about it, a little bit about the history, and see what it's gone through. Stephen Paul Marsh, when he coined it, it could apply to digital trust, but his doctoral thesis, which is what this was written for, was in psychology. In 2001, the Ostem was first created. That was essentially a flow chart, the very first version. Quickly, it ramped up to version two. Then there were, I think, a couple of 2 point something versions. And then roughly 2009 or 10 was when version three came out. Paramount or integrated into the Awesome has always been some kind of view of trust. Well, let me back up a little bit. Part of the background of the Awesome is Pete, at the time who invented it, was a pen tester, and he noticed that the reporting and the actual process of doing the pen tests left a lot to be desired. One of the goals of the Ostem was to make a pen test repeatable by including scope, including anomalies, including limitations to the test, um, so on. We can get into huge background on that, but we're here for zero trust. The Ostem takes a whole chapter to explain trust. Trust is a vulnerability, and the Ostem is partly well known for its controls, 10 controls. And trust being a vulnerability, you can apply controls to help mitigate any risk associated with the trust vulnerability. ISOCOM also has a certified trust analyst certification, and that is purely based on trust. And it doesn't go just into IT or system trust, but physical trust related around physical access to places, social engineering, and it's essentially how to apply fact-based trust metrics rather than emotional based. And trust being a vulnerability, it's an interaction that needs to be controlled in its porosity. Porosity is part of the attack surface. Any interaction you can have with an asset adds to its porosity. If you have an API server, that's porosity. You have a web server, that's porosity. Database backend, even though you're using the web server as a proxy to interact with it, it now adds to your porosity. The more porosity you have, the larger your attack surface is, and the less security you have by default, which is where the controls come into place. So defining trust, zero trust, as I guess widely announced in 2010, is never trust, always verify. This has been something that the Austin has said for since its beginning. You do require certain amounts of trust, so there's a little bit of vagueness in the actual zero trust definition. Uh, One of its ideals is that you need to constantly re-authenticate, which doesn't make a lot of sense if your web server and your database backend, they have to trust each other. And yes, you can consider loosely that the connect interactions between the two are continually re-authenticated, but I believe that's a little bit outside of the original intent of zero trust, which is, every time you need to make an interaction with the server or service, you're re-authenticating. Uh, like in an example of a Windows network, when you need access to a resource, the interactions that take place, distribute a ticket, authenticate you, connect. And the idea of zero trust is every time you needed a connection to that server, you're continually re-authenticating, which can obviously carry a lot of overhead with it as well. Now, if you, which I've done this, go out to YouTube and look up zero trust, and you will find all the huge players, all the big companies that everyone's heard of. And if you watch the videos, you'll see one thing: none of them align. They all have a spin. Everything is their solution is the best solution. And of course, when we're talking about trust or zero trust, that can develop a huge range of areas. You're not going to have the same type of trust for a physical access to a building that you're going to have between a web server and a database backend, or even an Active Directory network for that matter. As Bruce Shiner said, if you think technology can solve your security problems, then you don't understand the problems and you don't understand the technology. As with we all have seen in our industry, buy this product, it will make XYZ problem go away without really thoroughly investigating or understanding why that's an issue and how to truly mitigate the issue or at least limit its exposure. So ultimately, my point is a product is not going to make your woes go away. One thing with the Ostem is it tries to remain vendor agnostic. It doesn't want to suggest any vendor. We don't know your environment. We don't know your business. That is what you know. So we help term the controls and the overall terminology into a way that's usable by everyone, and then you determine your situation, your resolution that best fits your business and needs. Uh, Another talk I'm planning on writing up is, excuse me, how you can use the risk assessment values to monitor and gauge your overall security stance. So, and this is where agnostic comes in. You may have a certain antivirus, and that's all it does is detect or detect viruses. But you can have another antivirus which will actually block, which will actually block a host, block the code from running. So Clam AV isn't going to start shutting things down. So that's going to apply to one control. Whereas another one that's shutting down the service, blocking the port, blacklisting the address it's trying to communicate with, can start wrapping into multiple controls. I only mentioned Clam AV because that's a pretty good target because it does what it does and it doesn't do anything beyond that. So, fallacies in trust. We have composability and transient. These are often how people base their trust decisions. If you look at social media, or especially if you look at politics, you will find people gravitating. They will trust one group of people or one person because of extenuating factors. Um, you may trust a influencer because someone you know trusts them, where you didn't actually have the reason to trust them. You're just hoping that the person that you trust that trusts them has a good reason, but they may be trusting them for a reason that doesn't matter to you. As you can see, this can get pretty involved. So the Austin defines trust as a relationship that exists where the target accepts interaction from another target within the scope. Uh, in the Austin itself, it has a few paragraphs on the Mobius defense. I took a snippet here. There's actually a whole separate document I'm trying to get a hold of and publish or put online. And the idea behind it is obviously the Austin could be very complicated to put into place. It's 240 some pages, I believe now, and it covers a lot of ground. And it's a beast, frankly. But so are other methodologies, and they're always growing. So the idea with the Mobius defense is you're going to the defense in width. The first time that you were to do an Ostem security audit is going to be daunting. It's going to take a lot of work. But once you get that in place, the idea is to continually keep that up. Once it's done, if you do it regularly, now you're basically spot checking and limiting your exposure, keeping trusts in check, so on and so forth. By the way, I also suggest actually reading the whole chapter on trust in the Ostem. It can get pretty in depth. Now, some of it may not make a lot of sense if you don't read the rest of it, but it's a good starting point. So, the 2010 version of Zero Trust is pushing to continually verify or authenticate with your asset. If you look at how Active Directory handles this, currently, you authenticate, get a ticket, and then you're authenticated for a while. If you need access to a different resource, then you're re-authenticating for the other resource, so on and so forth. If you had to re-authenticate for every single interaction, let's say, just having a network share, and every time you edit a file, open a file, saved a file, you're constantly re-authenticating. Now, multiply that by X amount of people in a large environment. I'm not saying that it can't handle it, but now you're really increasing the overhead. Now, if someone is trying to attack your Active Directory, now you have more logs to sift through, hoping that you catch that needle in the haystack. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, it's just something to consider. Uh, so the Ostem 4, I know, has been mentioned many times throughout the years, throughout the last 10 years of coming out. We are actually, for real this time, trying to push it out by the end of this year. We can always use more volunteers, both for the Ostem and the Hacker High School.